everybody. Steve Napier. Welcome to the Circle of Brilliance. Today, I was going to move on to a new topic, but instead I'm kind of segueing to a related topic because of two questions that came up following our last discussion. So those two questions, first of all, was the person wanted to know what the difference was between negativity and what I have labeled in the past as being logical negative assessment. And so I thought we need to dig into that a little bit. And then the next question was, how do we go about managing an individual or working with an individual, coaching an individual, and to put a better frame, I guess, around their responses to the things that are happening in their world around them. And so is it about shrinking certain bands, eliminating certain bands? I guess the question came up, does anybody possess all six of these in equal balance? Or are there certain people who are missing some of these? Are some bands very wide and push everything else to a smaller expression? So I think there's something there to be talked about. But I'd like to begin by talking about the difference between being negativity, and logical negative assessment. So logical negative assessment is exactly what those words imply. It's completely logical. There's no emotion involved in it. When I think of negativity, I'm thinking about someone being primarily ruled by their emotional state. That might actually be denying whatever the logic of the situation really happens to be. So when someone is being negative, I think that's a dramatically different thing than logical negative assessment. Logical negative assessment is really nothing more than someone from a detached place observing a situation or thinking about a future behavior or a goal someone's working on, and simply saying X is part of the situation. X may serve as a barrier. So maybe it is a barrier. Maybe it might appear to be as a barrier, but this is being driven by logic. And so when I think of logical negative assessment, I don't think of it as being negativity at all. What do you guys think about that?
I think that's absolutely true. I mean, logical negative assessment is got to be a portion of problem solving.
Right. Right. Otherwise, how do you go about building a strategy that's going to get you from point A to point B if you are starting off in total denial that obstacles either exist or might appear? Some things are very predictable. And I think about even if we're trying to build a case for the powers that be to do something we'd like them to do, we may anticipate pushback. That's logical negative assessment. And because that assessment has been performed, we can then prepare accordingly. So I've just always been very concerned when people put this logical negative assessment into the category of being negative and therefore saying it is bad, it must be avoided, etc. So who's the phone caller?
Hey T, this is Tim.
Hey Tim, how are you?
I'm great, man. Listen, for me, the logical assessment is more cognitive versus the negativity is more emotional as a reaction to whatever the person is encountering. So for me, that's how I make the distinction between the two. One is cognitive and the other is emotional.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Yeah. I'll also throw this out and tell me if this resonates with you guys, but I actually have always thought of logical negative assessment as being a positive thing. So I don't even think that it's tipping its toe into negativity. I think it belongs in the realm of positivity.
Yeah, T, this is Peter. Couldn't you say that it might prevent a war? Let's say like Vietnam or Iraq, that negative assessment could be what's going to happen if we really do. Are they going to really come after us with roses or something else?
Right. Right. And so, Brian, I have to imagine this comes up in medicine all the time.
Yeah.
That, you're examining a patient and talking with colleagues about whatever happens to be going on. And obviously, your complete motive is positive in nature. But I have to believe a lot of what you talk about is logical negative assessment, ruling out things, um, or predicting because of prior experiences that X might happen.
Right. In fact, that's the root of how medicine is taught, right? And in school, you look at so that you can spot abnormalities. The
Mhm.
challenge becomes it doesn't that they when they speak from that perspective, it creates a negative state of mind for people who can't understand that that's where they're starting from. So they're
Right.
taught to think from that perspective, and the industry is built around this idea that for the body to function normally, it has to almost create these situations. And so medicine designed to treat symptoms, but not the root cause.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Well, absolutely, because I was just, as you were saying this, I was thinking the trigger that makes someone decide to go and see a doctor is usually going to be logical negative assessment.
Mhm.
They're looking at their situation, like David smashing his hand, and going like, well, this isn't right. So,
Mhm.
you know, maybe we need to have a look at this, or maybe I need to slap a Band-Aid on something. So I think I mean, I understand there's also wellness visits and routine visits, things like that. But otherwise, I think most of the reason why anyone would seek out a physician is because they think something is wrong.
Mhm.
And it's coming from a logical negative assessment sort of a situation. If your finger is suddenly pointing in an entirely different direction, you would think, maybe someone should look at that. So logical negative assessment. So all right, so Peter, back to you. So you were kind of thinking like if the logical negative assessment actually ends up preventing some sort of horrible outcome down the road, it's kind of like inherently positive. Is
Yes, yes. Well,
Yeah.
say the Pollyannish, say at the rack, it was that reverse domino theory where I heard one person say Vietnam was based on a paranoid fantasy, that,
Hmm.
dominoes will fall. The Iraq war was the opposite of that, a fantasy that, democracy will kind of fall like dominoes everywhere else, which wasn't the case. And so if someone had a sobering, let's say logical negative sense that if we invade, that it could potentially lead to a war that's unwinnable and untenable and could last years. That if there was enough of that, maybe it would have kept us from going into these terrible situations.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Hmm. I would agree. I would agree. Okay, so hopefully that gives you guys a little bit of insights into how the full range of what positive thinking might include. I do believe positive thinking allows space for logical negative assessment. It's when we can become emotionally involved with whatever that factoid happens to be, that now we run the risk of getting into negativity. Um, Now, I brought this up because someone mentioned appreciative inquiry. Peter, was that you that mentioned appreciative inquiry?
I don't recall, but I do advocate it on
Yeah,
occasion.
because I think we talked about this before. There are people in the world of appreciative inquiry who believe that all negative phrasing, all negative assessment has to be set aside. And I didn't read that anywhere in the book. So do you remember any reference whatsoever to logical negative assessment not being part of appreciative inquiry?
No, I think it's important to really have a sober look at reality, and I think we can be realistically positive and appreciative to say, yeah, we have a bad hand of cards. Let's look at how we can play them, but I think we have to see things as they are.
Right. And so what's this line then between logical negative assessment and negativity? We've already said the negativity is more emotionally ruled than logically ruled, but can you perhaps describe a progression that someone might move from logical negative assessment into negativity?
I
Anybody?
think
Yeah.
when they start taking it personally.
All right, so that's part of it. If we personalize it, go ahead,
I
Peter. What
think
were you saying? Yeah.
I think if we judge someone, we tend to shut them down. We can act in a way to make them behave. So if we judge someone to think, here's a negative assessment that they're incompetent or they're lazy or they're not trying, and then we come across as critical, condescending. I think the 3 C's you said, Dale Carnegie in one of the calls:
Yep.
criticize, complain,
And
condemn.
condemn. Yeah. Yeah.
And then we shut people down, and then we say, well, okay, look, they're, it's true what I feel. And so I think in interpersonal relationships, when we are doing that critical, judgmental, and condemning, let's say, we shut people down, and that I can't help but think is really negative, and really kind of sets us up to experience the very things that we are feeling or thinking about people.
You can
Excellent.
do a logical negative assessment without being negative.
That's the whole point of it, doing it, well, you want to stay detached, because we're just really saying, like, look, X is true. And it's something that we're going to need to factor in. I don't even know that I need to describe it as negative, although I understand it's playing the devil's advocate, or it's opening up your eyes to the obstacles that, as I've said before, exist or we predict we might encounter.
I
So
like what Tim had talked about in terms of logical negative assessment being cognitive, because if that takes a sense of consciousness, right? So if you're overwhelmed by the negative state, that means you're emotionally ruled. And since we understand that good decision making, particularly how the brain toggles between the limbic and the cortex, that requires a balance. And so when people get into, I imagine, the negative states of things, they're emotionally ruled, which means that the cognitive side is shut off or certainly limited. And so, that feeling can become just that overwhelming to the fact they just give up and do what Peter said. They'll shut off this capacity to say, okay, I need to step back, right, and figure out what's really going on here. We talked about that when we were talking about conflict. Oftentimes, you're not really talking about what's really going on, because your capacity at that point is distorted somewhat.
Very good. So what do you guys think would be your strategy? So Brian, building on what you've just said, what would you say your strategy is to help, I almost used the word negate, to help manage that situation?
I think when I see it in like a patient, I always go to what we know as a Diane Buffling methodology.
Maneuver, right?
But
Yeah, the maneuver.
I use the power of inquiry, because the power of inquiry opens up exactly what Peter was describing. It opens up options. And I remember talking with social psychologists with some of these patients we work with from a clinical perspective. And a lot of times they say when someone is negative all the time, or they're in SOS, a state of stuckness, the number one thing they need are options. In the way the brain communicates, when we use a definitive statement, you limit options. But when you ask a question, you open up the power of the brain getting very creative to figure things out, or at least positioned to figure things out. So I like to use a lot of inquiring. We learned that in medical school in terms of what they call motivational interviewing.
And is that something that's actually taught in U.S. medical schools, or is that in other education you've received?
I think they do teach it in U.S. medical schools as well for motivational interviewing.
Oh, good. Yeah, good. Okay. All right. So here, let's kind of move into how do we manage this situation? So let's play a little bit with this. So if I said to you guys as individuals, Are there any of these 6 bands that you feel really doesn't apply to you? So are there any of these that you just go, that band, if I have it, is so minuscule in its width that it's rarely expressed? Anyone have things?
I'd say both toxics. I mean, I'm certainly not toxically negative, but I certainly don't consider myself toxically positive either.
Right, right. Others, what do you guys think?
Yeah, I would agree with that
Yeah.
too, that I like to think that I would never be toxic negative. And I'd like to think I'm not toxic positive, but that may be in the eye of the beholder. I have friends that would say, yeah, I think you do have rose-colored glasses.
Right, right, right. Or, we always go back to the change grid being completely activity specific. So I would certainly agree. I don't think I'm toxic negative. I don't think it's just how I operate. Toxic positivity. I don't know that I have a lot of toxic positivity because I'm not all that afraid of the logical negative things that might be out there. So I'm not too worried about that. But I have often found myself saying to a client, just in pet, they'll say something like, well, we can't do this and we shouldn't do that and blah, blah, blah. And I immediately say to them, well, certainly not with that attitude. And so I kind of think what I'm implying is like, you got to change the way you're looking at the situation. Is that toxic positivity or is that just trying to move them out of their negativity into a positive option? So, because I don't want to deny that what they're saying is an issue, but nevertheless, I just really believe that as long as you hold that belief, your chances of having a successful outcome are diminished.
Mhm.
Thoughts about that?
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. So, self-fulfilling prophecy. Any of you feel like you have your fair share of toxic neutrality?
No, that's the third one. I think that, it's that word toxic really does invade your senses. And, I can be neutral, but
Yeah,
if I hear a compelling argument one way or the other, I'm no longer going to be neutral.
right, right. And so you're either going to move into positivity on one, we talked about that anytime you move off center, you're going to favor your position while you simultaneously unfavor the other position or other positions. So it's almost like positivity and logical negative assessment at the very least go together, because I'll feel very positive about whatever course of action I'm advocating, and I may be very much in logical negative assessment about the other courses of action that someone might want to take. Does that feel realistic or
Yep, I think
good?
that's the natural course of events.
Yeah, I hopefully I'm not going positive about one and negative about the others. This is another thing they brought up. They said, if logical negative assessment can be an issue or is thought of as being an issue, is there such a thing as emotional positive assessment? And is that a problem
Well, I
when
think
people just want to stay jazzed?
no, I think it could be. I think it bleeds into toxic positivity, though.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too.
Well, yeah, how would you define inspiration and passion, which can be vital, but what if
Hmm.
someone's too passionate or, can one be too inspirational?
Right. I've always thought like, well, if I was up on stage and someone say like, oh, you're a motivational speaker. And I kind of like, I'm a little bit repelled by that because it's like, no, that's not what I'm here to do. But yeah, because sometimes I wonder, are purely motivational or inspirational messages operating in the denial of logical negative assessment? In which case they would be toxic positivity.
Hmm.
Right,
So,
because they're manipulative, right?
right, that's the toxic part.
Right, right. And
Right.
that's what's in the religious guy Jim Jones or Colt or something like that.
Jim Jones.
Jim Jones,
Yeah,
where we drank the bathtub, drank the
right,
Kool-Aid.
right.
Yep. Hmm.
Yeah, very positive messages for those who wanted to hear what he had to say and they actually believed it. But
Yes.
it literally was toxic, like literally.
Literally, yeah, yeah, because sadly he was a psychopath. But oh, uh, any day you guys want to dive into cult behavior and how cults are structured, talk about tension management. It's all tension management, and be neutral about that. But my goodness, these people that create successful cults are experts at tension management.
I just seen an article today, I think it was in Business Insider, about that very thing, about cult like behavior with the political parties.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah,
they're
yeah.
talking about that. So I think that'll be an interesting conversation because it's at least according to the article, a lot of manipulation is used.
Hmm.
So the
Yeah.
positive messages that are drawing people, it hits them right at the heart, and so they get hooked, literally hooked.
Right, right. Well, and I'll say when it comes to me, the value of politics is that each of these different parties um, has done its own logical negative assessment. And as long as they stay with logical negative assessment and presenting whatever their positive platform happens to be, it's all good. I think it's all nice, intellectual, interesting things to think about. But when it starts to become toxic positivity, negativity, toxic negativity, um, and that's now we got real problems, and take it to the extreme, which is what you've just said, and know that across the spectrum, cults have formed. They
Mhm.
exist. And they might be somehow or another aligned with, actually, I hope they're more aligned with a political party rather than affiliated with a political party. But yeah, cults are real.
So do
Cults
you
are real.
think some of this that we're like exploring, there are certain fields, like even in medicine, for those who wear like the white coat and they become the so-called authority, and
Mhm.
how physicians speak to patients regarding their illness.
Yeah,
And then if the patient has the audacity to ask questions about their body that is theirs,
yeah,
that's looked down upon. I had
right.
patients like literally tell me that they had physicians say, I can no longer be your doctor because you don't listen to what I tell you to do.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, that's a very common kind of a thing. And I think it really is. Well, you guys can weigh in on it. I mean, this isn't just my thoughts around it, but I think that's about the doctor's insecurities. Why do they need to have a God complex? Because somehow or
Mhm.
another they feel inferior, which is why they pursued a course of development that they thought could make them be superior to
Mhm.
others. And they forget that what they're doing is practicing medicine, which means they have always been and always will be trying to figure things out.
Right.
So there's nothing that's all that conclusive. I'm sure there's certain things that are pretty straightforward, but you know, most of medicine is an exploration.
Mhm.
So that's why I've always said I really don't want to know whether I don't want to see the doctor's diploma. I want to see their transcript. So somebody graduated at the bottom of the class. I don't want that doctor who eked by treating me. So
Mhm.
so there you go. There you go. All right. So taking this back to this. So I think we're all right. Oh, by the way, toxic neutrality. I think all of us have moments of toxic neutrality. Um, so I'll describe it and you tell me why, under certain circumstances, that might be the choice you make. So you're sitting at a holiday dining table with family, and something is being said or done, and you decide to hold your tongue. holding your tongue is a form of toxic neutrality.
Hmm.
So why would you decide to take that position, even though you know that you have an opportunity to fix something, help something, move something? Why do we sometimes say, I'm fully aware of all that, but I am choosing to hold back getting involved? Anybody want to fess up?
See, I think this is Tim again. I think that that's perhaps driven by what an individual is willing to gain, lose, give up,
Right, right.
whatever, however they assess that situation for them personally.
Yeah, which is why I think often you hear them say, confronting them is just not worth it.
Hmm.
I'm not going to profit so much, so it's easier to just tolerate it than confront it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, that's it.
yeah. In fact, I was having a conversation with my trainer. He would not mind me sharing this with you, but his father passed away a couple of years ago. And he'd been in the hospital. He was really, every problem that was solved was replaced by another unsolvable problem. And so, the handwriting was most definitely on the wall. But she informed him that his father had passed away by sending him a text message. And he took great offense to that and has never really brought it up. He was going to bring it up at the Thanksgiving table. And I said, really? That's the timing? That's what I kind of went like, oh no, I'm really encouraging him to hold back something. And so if I said to you guys, sometimes what's behind toxic neutrality is diplomacy.
Hmm.
Yeah, something like that. So, nevertheless, we know that we are leaving a less than ideal situation in a less than ideal state.
I would call it cowardice.
Oh, do tell. What's the borderline between diplomacy and cowardice?
Well, I think they must bump up against each other a little bit, but you know, I think there are people who hear all the facts, hear the logical negative assessment, and just won't do anything.
Right,
Uh,
right, right. Yeah.
they're convinced, but they won't do anything.
Yeah. Yep, yep, yep. Now that's interesting the way you just described that, because it's like taking a toxic neutrality position when someone else is being toxically negative or negative.
Uh-huh.
So you're holding back the intervention. Edie, go right ahead.
I just think the world has changed and I've changed with that because I am pretty fast to speak up. We're talking about bystanders and being passive. And I think it's scarier because somebody might pull a gun.
Well,
I
that's
mean,
true.
yeah. So I think a lot of us have shifted a little bit just because it's a higher risk for us.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And so a lot of the neutrality that we might be encountering could just be toxic neutrality, or it could still neutrality, but it's got a toxic element to it because the person doesn't want to get involved, fears getting involved, doesn't feel like the equation. As Tim was pointing out, we got this whole quadrants about control. What do we want to gain, lose, etc. And maybe we just say, look, it just really doesn't merit the amount of energy that I'm going to have to put into this.
I
So,
think that's me a lot of times because I've always been a proponent, and I've been a martial arts all of my life. So I've always been this proponent about managing my energy. And when you grow up in a huge family like mine with 6 sisters, 3 brothers, and lived in all these different countries around the world, I just learned to kind of understand as much as possible who I'm dealing with and what's in my environment. And it's just sometimes I just make decisions that, okay, just based on my perception, which indeed can be wrong, I'm not going to get involved in this because it's going to take way too much energy to explain. And oftentimes, I remember the first country we lived in outside of South Africa, I was considered in Kenya and Tanzania, Mzungu. Mzungu is a term for outsider.
Mhm.
So they're like, yeah, you're black, you're an African, but you're Mzungu.
Right.
So I'm like, I'm not going to get involved with that. It takes some time for that to develop that kind of understanding. And I just didn't want to put in that effort. I didn't have the confidence. I didn't have the capacity to do it. And nor was I interested at that time. Now, like Edie was talking about, might be a different story. But a lot of times for me, it's about, okay, do I have the energy? Do I actually want to do this?
Right. So let's explore the toxic part of that situation as you've described it. All the toxic word implies is that some sort of an injury is occurring. And
Mhm.
so because you held back saying or doing whatever you could have said or done in that situation, how does the toxicity express itself? Is someone outside of you being negatively impacted? Is it something that you are dealing with internally, but it's a manageable damage?
Could
Yeah,
it be
it kind of keeps
withholding of facts?
Yeah, go right
right.
ahead. Say that again.
Could it just be withholding of facts?
Right.
Yeah.
But when I withhold something, I still have a bit of my energy has now been allocated for maintaining that silence.
Mhm.
And that's a price I'm paying for that, as opposed to just blurting it out and letting whatever happens, happens.
Well, see,
So,
don't we see just oodles and oodles and oodles of examples of toxic neutrality in these riots that are going on, where people are
mhm.
walking around with their phones and watching people be beaten and watching stores get looted, and
Yep.
all they can do is just take pictures and walk
Mhm.
along with the crowd.
Yep. And again, that toxic neutrality, now the damage is happening to people outside of them, and
Yep.
still they choose not to do anything around it. And again, there's a risk involved, I'm sure, if they try to do something in that particular scenario, but you know.
So, T, what the conversation reminds me of is some work done by Jane Elliott around blue eyes, brown eyes.
I remember that, yes.
And I'm remembering a scene where she was debriefing the exercise, where she had been discriminatory and just abusive to, I believe it was the blue eyed
Blue
kid.
eyes, yep, uh-huh.
And in the debrief, she asked some of the blue eyes. She said, "When you saw me attacking so and so, why didn't you others speak up?" And one of the gentlemen said to her, "Well, I figured, as long as you weren't attacking me, I wasn't going to say anything."
Right.
Mhm.
And so no one came to that person's rescue. They were all in the same group. They saw their colleague being abused verbally by her, and no one came to her rescue. No one spoke up.
Mm-hmm. So
And I think,
then,
as Dave was talking about that cowardly uh, approach, I think some of that came out in that debrief.
yeah, and so that makes it sound like toxic neutrality is actually a form of self-preservation, or a way we have valued what it is that we're going to do or not do. So, because why do I want to incur the wrath? Why do I want to put myself literally in harm's way, to David's example, by stepping outside of my neutral position and getting involved? Well, that might actually put me in harm's way. Or as we were talking about, I think with Peter's example, there may simply not be enough value in me getting involved to compel me to take that next step.
Mhm.
So neutrality, therefore, from that perspective, is more about inward than outward.
Yep.
Because I see that, like, I had a friend who was given an injection, and the patient didn't want the injection from him because he's Asian, and his specific words were, "I don't want the injection from you because aren't you the one who brought the virus over here?"
Oh my goodness.
So I said something then, because I said, okay, that to me, that outwardly thing, I said to him, that was wrong. I explained to the patient that that was wrong that he said that.
Absolutely.
So I didn't mind, talking that, because he could have said the same thing to me.
Right. And again, the patient making that statement was an example of, what would you guys say, negativity or toxic negativity?
Toxic.
Toxic. I have to believe he didn't just suddenly come up with that. It's probably, one element of multiple conversations he's had all around there. I mean, I know a lot of people of Asian descent who have never left the United States. So
Right.
how can I hold them accountable for bringing something? It's like, oh, I love it. I forget which comedy show it was on. Might have been, I think it was Fresh Off the Boat or one of those about Asian American families. But somebody who was definitely, the character was very much a bigot, and said to this Asian guy, "You should go back where you came from." And he said, "Pensacola." Oh, that's perfect. That's perfect. That's good. Anyway, there you are. Okay, so I think eliminating the toxic elements is really a good focus. Certainly toxic negativity is more problematic than toxic positivity, even though toxic positivity should not be taken lightly. In the case of toxic negativity, I think we're dealing with a different psychology than toxic positivity. Remember, we said toxic positivity generally is a way that a person can deny or diminish whatever the obstacles are that lay before them. So I think in the one case, who said we got to give this person courage? Was that, or am I just adding that from David talking about cowardice? Have the courage to confront whatever, Go ahead, David.
Toxic positivity needs courage.
Right, because usually the reason why I'm being toxically positive, I'm doing it to myself as opposed to doing it as a tool of manipulating others. I'm basically saying, look on the bright side of things, focus on what's really, really good. It's a lovely day, it's almost like I'm trying not to see the negative thing that is right about to happen. And I'm trying to, pretend it doesn't exist, or pretend that it's not going to really impact me. So I think that if the toxic positivity is just a way that the individual is managing their own responses to obstacles that they encounter, that's a very different coaching or counseling situation than when people are using toxic positivity in their interactions with others, which could actually slow other people down from doing what really needs to be done to prepare for all outcomes.
Is it possible to read a change grid and pick up any of this?
I believe so. I definitely believe so. Again, never forget that the change grid is supposed to be a tool of conversation. So as I look at things on the change grid, I would certainly say to you that it should not surprise any of us that someone who's plotting up in stress is likely to be feeling negative about the situation. That one of the ways people might be managing the negative situation is through toxic positivity. But they have to be a little bit further down grid for the toxic positivity, because the only way toxic positivity works is when you can point to good things that are available that you believe should completely offset whatever the negative aspect happens to be. So I'll give you an example of this. In fact, Linda's on the call. So, I'm about to turn 65. You do have 6 months, though, to find me the perfect present. But yes, June 14th, I'll be 65. Do plan accordingly. And never forget that real estate is the perfect gift. But
Plant?
what's that?
That means you want a plant?
Yeah, anything would be just fine. Thank you. No, 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 no. But, we talk about people having lifespans and your family history telling you what a lifespan might involve. And so we've had many a time when we've had conversations about what my anticipated lifespan is. And Linda will go toxic positive about that. She'll say, yeah, but you live a much healthier lifestyle than your parents did. Or, yeah, that's not going to happen to you, because of A, B, C, whatever the case be. I don't have the risk factors. I don't have the behaviors that they had. I have a very different life than they had. And I said, that's all fine and dandy, but when it comes to the world of actuarial science, that doesn't really mean making lifestyle changes doesn't buy you an extra, 20% lifespan. It might get you an extra year or two, but it's not going to really skew things that much. So now, in that particular case, Linda's toxic positivity is an expression of love, but it could still harm things because it means we might not be making decisions now that need to be made based on what the science would show. Can you guys?
Is it my turn?
Yes, please, dear, go right ahead.
Okay, I think my positivity
Yes.
is logical.
Okay, go ahead.
Because there are many, many, many studies that have shown whatever you tell your brain over and over and over and over and over again, the brain will make sure it happens.
Okay.
So I believe that negative words like my parents only lived this long, so that's how long I'm going to live, or my brothers, or I believe that is setting up your body or your brain to make sure that happens.
Now, I love you, T.
Yes.
I'm going to have to join Team Linda on this one.
Excellent.
And I'll weigh in too. Linda, it sounds like you've been reading Bruce Lipton with Epigenetics, The Biology of Belief is his landmark book.
But here's the thing, there's a difference,
Yes.
there's a symbiotic relationship, what Linda is explaining, between lifespan and what is known as health span. Health span always deals with quality of life. And so even though someone may have a gene or a trait that they're carrying that their family has, the gene, just like we were just talking about with conflict and things, it needs expression. So gene expression is uniquely different. Something has to trigger that gene to become cancerous. Something has to trigger that gene to express itself in certain ways. And that's often a product of lifestyles, often a product of nutrition or something like that. Like for me with the autoimmune conditions that I suffer from, there's 3 triggers out of the 180. So I'm talking about eczema, psoriasis, rheumatoid arthritis, like going down the list. All 180 share the same 3 triggers: nutrition, lifestyle, and gene expression. Those are things that I can't control.
How do you control gene expression? But let me say one thing real quick. Peter, the book you mentioned sounds fascinating. Could you chat over?
Yeah, so
tell of us
Bruce
the name of it?
Lipton, yeah, he's all over the internet, YouTube. And he's I think the father of epigenetics, and
Exactly.
yeah, so the biology of belief, and just reinforcing what Brian said, the way he looks at genes, he'd be like saying, what would it look like if you went to an architect's office and said, and you looked at the blueprints of a building, you said, okay, well, express them. He'd look at you in disbelief, say, these are blueprints. They're not going to turn into a building. And that's kind of the metaphor he uses, is that, genes are blueprints, but you need something to activate them.
Interesting. Okay. And so, Brian, you said there are three triggers or three factors that impact it. So you said lifestyle, nutrition, and the third
So
one
the
was?
genes, the genes. So by genes, I mean the gene has to be triggered to express a certain way. For instance, we all have what's called oncogenes,
Mhm.
but oncogenes that turn cancerous need a trigger, and it's often triggered by glucose. It's often triggered by lifestyle and a host of other things. But we all have them. That's why they studied in terms of like cancer. 70% is attributed to diet.
Right. Yeah. Particularly high sugar, high glucose diets.
Exactly, exactly. So these things trigger these genes to express themselves differently, and that becomes the issue. So that idea of lifespan and health span, they kind of work together. So if you improve the quality of your life, through lifestyle, nutrition, moving your body, effective sleep, those kinds of things, you do add some years to your life. And that's been studied with those areas around the world where people consistently live to be centenarians. The China
Okay.
study is a 30-year study on that.
And so, so this idea about if you can change your mind, you can change your life is certainly something that's been written about and talked about extensively. So going back to the example with me and Linda, so I must have a negative frame around it. Linda has a positive frame around her, how she speaks to me, but I see what she does as being toxic positivity.
Mm.
So because I feel like I've got to do something about the negative kinds of things. And so I just brought this up and I wanted to bring it up just as an example to say, these are the kinds of situations that we often find ourselves dealing with when we're doing our work as coaches, consultants, whatever, whether it's a couple, whether it's just business partners or some sort of a team. It's not at all unusual to find that some player in that drama has a negative viewpoint, someone else has a positive viewpoint, it might be viewed as being toxic. These could also be a list of all the different players in the drama.
Right.
So how do we go about managing these different plays? I
Well,
thought that would be an interesting thing. Yeah, go ahead,
yeah.
Peter.
And I was just thinking, well, we make up stories, and since we make it up, why not make up something that works better?
Oh, do
Wow,
tell. Yeah.
that's powerful.
Yeah, the
Right.
way we frame things. And again, if what we're going at is that the toxic positivity or toxic negativity could be in the eye of the beholder, well, we have the choice to reframe it, to adjust the way we frame what's
Mhm.
around us.
Mm,
Right.
good.
Okay, well, we just have 4 minutes left, but let me put forth the big question that I was chatting with one of our colleagues about, and that is that with our world the way that it is today, one of these bands they believe is expanding greatly at the cost of another band that is shrinking dramatically. And so their thought is that until we do something to stop that expansion of one at the cost of the other, we could be on a one-way street to absolute despair. So anyone want to throw out in the 3 minutes we have left, which one do you think is very much expanding?
I would vote for toxic negativity.
I would,
Toxic negativity and negativity. Yeah, go
I'll
ahead, David.
second that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I would say neutrality is disappearing.
Neutrality is disappearing, or as I think Brian pointed out earlier, or it's being increasingly stifled.
Mm-hmm.
We're all becoming more hesitant. So, but that gets to your point, David. If I'm hesitating, am I neutral anymore? Or am I just pretending to be neutral? Because in truth, I really have a very different energy around whatever the situation happens to be, but I'm just choosing to stay neutral or appear to stay neutral. That's
See, I would
interesting.
say that hesitancy is a degree of the neutrality because
Yeah, yeah.
you're not contributing. And for me, all of these, when I think in terms of the client base, all of this points back to the environment. And in my work, we talk a lot about trying to create inclusive work cultures. And you could very well see all stages of these six.
Right, right, right. And so their thought was, is it possible for someone to have a little bit of neutrality in the middle and maybe a little bit of negativity? Get rid of all three toxics. Is it possible for someone to have a little bit of neutrality in the middle, a little bit of negativity out at the furthest reaches of the danger zones, and have everything else be positive? And if that was the case, would that be good? Would that be better than what they think right now is that almost everything is toxic negativity and negativity?
Yeah, I can't imagine.
Yeah, wouldn't critical thinking play into that?
Yeah, well, that's why I'm kind of when I think critical thinking, I think, is that positivity combined with logical negative assessment?
I think it could be.
Yeah, because when I think of critical thinking, it all feels very logical to me. And I'm all for logic. I think logic is inherently positive. Now, what you do with that information, that's a totally different discussion to be had. But so I bring this up just to set the stage for next time around. And so if I said to you, if there was one thing that we could do for our clients that would really help them, not only in this moment, but in life as it continues to evolve, should we be helping them to expand positivity as a way of squashing negativity? Or is it better to try to squash negativity and toxic negativity? So where do you put your energy? Where's the best investment to ultimately produce the best outcome? So any closing thoughts about that before we get into it on Thursday?
I have one. Wayne Dyer's a quote from Wayne Dyer that what we focus on expands.
And so if we focus on negativity, even if it's trying to get rid of it, is it likely to get rid of it?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Because I can only get rid of negativity by substituting something else for it. Right? Because it's like it's occupying mental space. Something else has to occupy it. I can't go from negative to a vacuum. We do talk about going from negative to neutral. We could also talk about then moving from neutral to positive. But I think we need to really kind of understand, where do you put the energy? And if I put enough energy into cultivating one of these, what's the likelihood that the others will kind of take care of themselves a little bit? So I'll close by saying that I have a slide that I used in my programs with IBM about this whole attitude sort of a thing, where I said that negativity, more than anything else, is a habit. And we need to break that habit. So with that, if you've been looking at my desktop, by the way, when you guys are looking at the screen right now, on the far right, do you see the participant list in the chat screen, or do you just see my PowerPoint presentation?
I just see your name.
Interesting. Because I was wondering, when I'm doing the whole thing just on my one screen, you know how Zoom gives you certain panels that you use for interacting? Are those actually being projected to everybody, or is it really just what is otherwise on your desktop?
What I have is whoever's the speaker shows up in a little box to the right of your slide.
Oh, yeah, and I don't even have that. So interesting. Okay. Well, anyway, if you were looking at my desktop, you could see far on the left here, there is a very large movement that's been going on apparently for a very long time that just says that we need to help people develop the skills of positivity. And if we can do that, that helps to insulate them from negativity. It helps to expand that. And I found one source that gave us 10 exercises on how to expand your positivity. So I thought it might be interesting to take a look at those and just see what we think about their usefulness.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah. Yep, yep. And by the way, this was just one place that had these 10. I'm going to tell you, you do a quick search on how to boost positive thinking, boost positive attitudes, anything like that, you're going to find literally, well, it's going to say millions because it's a Google search, but on the first couple of pages, you're going to find dozens and dozens of resources that just really get into this in a great, great, great dive. On Thursday, I'll share with you why I think that's not only so interesting, but also how it could end up being so valuable in the practices that you guys are all operating. So with that, thank you all very much for joining in, and we'll talk again on Thursday.
Feel better, T.
Thanks. Thanks. Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Better.
Bye for
Bye,
now.
all.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
See you later.